1 Samuel chapter 13. 1 Samuel 13, verse 1. This is the 2-year fall of Saul. Now, this will just be a little bit of teaching, and maybe tonight we'll get a sermon on it, but right now we're just going to go through and see the story, because it's a fun story. For 2 years, Saul has been on the throne. He's been the king, and he came from nothing and became the king. So we'll see him here. In 1 Samuel 13, verse 1, says, Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, something happens. Verse 5. And the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash, eastward from Bethaven. Okay, there's this place, Michmash, or am I saying it right? Michmash. Okay, let's see it on the map. And here it is. I know that doesn't tell you where it is, but that's the general location of where Michmash is. It's in the central part of Israel, and we'll take a close-up of it. There you are if you're getting in closer. And in particular, Michmash is right there. Can you see that on the screen? I don't know. Yeah, I can see it from here, but you might not be able to. It's right there. The name Michmash is used only a handful of times in the scripture. It's just a small little outcrop. It's a fortress that's used from time to time, and it's on the top of these rocks and crevices that's hard to get to. It's used in Ezra 2:27. There's a group of people who come back from captivity who are from this place right here. It's also used in Nehemiah. The same group is referred to. It's used in Isaiah as saying, one day I'm going to deliver my people, even the people that are from, what's the name of that place? Michmash? Michmash. That's a weird name. Okay, Michmash. It's there eastward from Bethaven. Look at 1 Samuel 13. 1 Samuel 13, and we're going to go down to verse 6. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, that's explained by the parentheses, for the people were distressed. So when you're distressed, you're in a strait, like a strait jacket. That would make you depressed. That would make you distressed. Then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in high places, in pits. So they're scared to death because the Philistines have come to town and they mean to do business. Verse 7. And some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Some people just flat out ran away. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. So the king goes to Gilgal. Well, this is an important place. This is the place appointed to get God's instruction on what's to be done. So this was before Jerusalem is set up and the temple's installed, and before all of that. One of the great places they had was Gilgal, and that's where they went. Saul had a route he would travel, and this was one of his haunts. He says also in verse 8, and he tarried 7 days. That's Samuel. He didn't come in to Gilgal to give them the message. And he's supposed to be there. He's late. It's been 7 days and he's not showed up, according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, bring hither the burnt offering to me, and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. Saul said, I don't need a Samuel for this. I'll do it myself. We got a battle to get to. And he did. Verse 10. And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offerings, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. So now he's going to be all nice and happy with him and give him a friendly greeting, even though he just took his job. And Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw the people were scattered from me. That was not the question. The question was what, not why. He didn't answer the question. Now, usually, when you ask someone a question and they will not answer directly the question you ask, there's sin they're hiding. Be careful. When somebody asks you a question, make sure you answer the question. Don't find something else to come up with. Keep the subject the subject. Now here, the Holy Spirit is... Go ahead.
Oh, you just reminded me of the Democratic debate.
Yeah, that's right.
That on the radio.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just
Yep.
thinking about the latest one I listened to excerpts from.
Yep. So here he's been asked a question. He can't answer the question. He's already trying to justify himself. He says, "And that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash." Okay, so he's upset because the enemy's army's up there. They're building up, and you haven't showed up. It's been 7 days. It's been 7 days, and the day's not over yet, but it's been 7 days. The clock ticked over to 7, so now I'm sitting on go. Let's move. Moving too quick. Now, we get in trouble when we do that too. God always takes a lot longer than we think he should. But he's going to come through, and it's going to be perfectly timed. It's going to be right on time, but it sure isn't our timing. As far as Saul's concerned, there's an army. And as we get farther into this, his main job was to defeat the Philistines. So he, as a king, that's what he's got to do. He's got to go out and fight that army. But there's something way more important. You can't fight the army without God's permission. If God doesn't go with you, it doesn't do you any good to go. So here we go. In verse 14, 1 Samuel 13:14. Samuel has this to say to him. "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee." After 2 years as king, Saul has decisively disqualified himself as ruler of God's people. It only took him 2 years. Look at verse 15. He says here in verse 15, "And Samuel arose and got him up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin." Okay, so he's going to leave. Samuel says, "I came here to do sacrifice. You've already done it. I just got a message to leave with you before I leave. That is, you're no more king. God's rejected you." So he gets up and leaves. Well, the only reason they were in Gilgal to begin with was to get God's permission to go to war. Now that's all void and null. It's time to go to battle. Just so happens that Samuel's going the same place the battle needs to start from anyway. In verse 15 there, "And Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. So only 600 of them wanted to go to church. In verse 16, "And Saul and Jonathan his son, and the people that were present with them, abode in Gibeah of Benjamin, but the Philistines encamped in Michmash." Okay, so they're making this their main base of operations here. He says in verse 17, "And the spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies." Okay, now this gets a little technical and complicated. That's why I put it on the PowerPoint map here. Because once you see all the details, it kind of fills in the gaps. At least it did for me. The Philistines are up here, and they're going to separate into 3 groups. If you study the ancient armies, they pretty much all do this. Their intent is to encircle and entrap. And they always do this. I don't know why they all do the same thing, but they do. Here it is. "One turned to the way that leadeth to Ophrah, unto the land of Shaul." Okay, so one's heading north. That's going to be the reserve unit. It's going to be the unit that can swing to either side and fill in the gap if needed there. Then verse 18, and the other company turned the way to Beth-horon. Okay, they're swinging around to the east. And another company turned the way to the border that looketh to the valley of Zebulun toward the wilderness. Okay, this one's heading toward the west. Okay, bad news. The Philistines are attempting to surround Israel, and they got a good start on it. They're moving. In verse 23. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the passage of Michmash. The passage. Okay, there's one passage that goes through these mountains and this terrain. There's only one. Otherwise, you've got to be a mountain climber. And you don't do battle if you're a mountain climber. You do one or the other. So there's one passage. This passage leads, as it shows right there on the map, from Michmash. It's going to come around. That's how they're going to encircle these guys. Because remember where they are? At Gibeah. So it's perfect. They're setting it up. Look at chapter 14, verse 4. Chapter 14, verse 4. Jonathan had captured a city and a garrison and took it from the Philistines. That's what started this whole mess to begin with. They found out Jonathan had captured and taken back something that belonged to Israel. And they said, we ain't standing for that. So Jonathan wasn't content to sit in Gilgal with the rest, with Saul and all his buddies, while they tried to figure out what to do without God in the mix. That doesn't work well. So Jonathan says, he's already showed me how to take one city. I'm going to go take Michmash. Let's get this thing over with. Brave guy. In verse 14, verse 4. Jonathan goes up here. He finds him a secret passage. Not the main road. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over into the Philistine garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. The name of the one was Bozez, and the other Seneth. The forefront of the one was situated northward over against Michmash, the other southward over against Gibeah. Okay, so these people did not expect to see somebody climbing, doing some mountain climbing with an armor bearer and bows and arrows coming up there to do some business. They were probably relaxing and having a good time. We're safe up here. You know, the battle will start in a little bit, and, you know, make sure we get plenty of food before we go in. You know, what soldiers do. Well, all of a sudden, up from these crevices and cracks and rocks of the hill come Jonathan and his armor bearer. That'd be a bad day. It was a bad day for 20 of them. Verse 13. And Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and the armor bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after them. And that first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men, within as it were a half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen would plow. He did something. Now, this is probably not a main force that here. This is probably the outskirts of the force, and there's 20 men just milling around or something, and they go up and they cut them down. Well, that's going to start a war. And it does start a war. But remember, God's rejected Saul. So he's going to use somebody he's already used. He's going to use Jonathan. And if it weren't for Jonathan, I don't know, God may have wiped Saul off the face of the earth right here. But it's more than just Jonathan at stake here. It's the people of God. So don't misconstrue God using an individual that he doesn't like because there are people that are under his command. We've seen it. One leader after the next that is wicked. Look at all the presidents. You got problems with all of them. Some of them God has used. Some of them have put in some bills that have kept our freedom so that we're not like Russia or China. Some of them have. Some of them do some wicked things, and God restrains it. Not because he likes them, because he likes us. That's what's going on here. Because of the people of God, God's still going to use this battle with Saul being in charge, even though he's already declared, I've rejected you. In chapter 14, verse 15, And there was a trembling in the host in the field, and among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling. This is not a matter of Israelites being a better equipped army. They probably weren't. It's a matter of who's on God's side. When God decides to go to war, nobody's standing. You can't oppose him. Verse 16, and the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. God always wins. We can count on it. Saul, his problem was he thought he had a bigger part in the battle than God had assigned him. And so he thought, I've got to get over there and start, laying things out and commanding people and bossing people around. I said, no, I'm in charge of this, not you. If Saul wouldn't wait for God's blessing to begin the battle, Samuel had one message for him, and it was this: I don't need a rebellious king to try to lead my rebellious children. That defeats the purpose of it. I need a king who's submitted to God, who can turn rebellion away from the other people. The two rebels don't help. Saul was given a trial run in chapter 11. His kingdom began in chapter 11. He got to go fight. You remember the guys come down there and the Ammonites have threatened to put their eyes out. And he says, we ain't having none of that. He chops up a yoke of oxen, sends it out to all the tribes and said, whoever doesn't show up, I'm going to chop you up like this. They all came out. They did battle and they beat them. That was a good day. Well, that was the way he started his ruling and reign. That was a good start. In chapter 11, verse 13, he gives God the glory for his victory. That's a very good start. And Saul said, there shall not be a man put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. Even though he just went to battle and did it, he's given the credit back to God. That's the way to do it. But he didn't do that in our battle in chapter 13. He went ahead and did it all himself. I'll do the sacrifice, I'll do the directing, I'll do it all. We don't have that much control. In chapter 12, after he'd given God credit for the victory, something happens. Saul's renewed as king by God. Remember early on, Samuel says, I'll anoint you a king, and I'm going to tell you what he's going to do to you. He's going to take your sons, he's going to take your daughters, he's going to do... It was kind of almost like a threat to install the king. But here, after he's done right and he's exalted God, Samuel says, let's go renew the kingdom. Let me set this thing up right. He's already submitted to God, and we can go with this. So, chapter 12, verse 20. And Samuel said unto the people, fear not, ye have done all this wickedness. That's a fact. And guess what? We have too. There's many times in life you realize, that was a sin. I was stupid. Okay, it doesn't have to end there. Here's a chance for a do-over right here. Yet turn not aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. God's greater than sin. If you can commit one sin and it causes you to never turn around and follow God again, you're telling me that sin is more powerful than God? No, it's not. But it sure will lie to us. In verse 21, and turn ye not aside, for then should you go after vain things, which cannot profit nor deliver. Now, they're going to need deliverance in a battle, for they are vain. That's how he began. He didn't stay that way. In only 2 years, God offered that fresh start, and Saul made sure that was history, not to be repeated. In chapter 13, verse 14, we saw Samuel's words. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. I know I just renewed it in chapter 11. But now chapter 13, God's got a message for you. Fun times are over. You're done. He says, the Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. So I wonder whose heart Saul was after. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. Saul soared from a zero to a hero to reject in a matter of 2 years. That's quite a roller coaster ride. Now we need to ask ourselves some things. Why did this happen? How did it happen? And can we prevent it from happening to us? Those are all important questions. Our verse gave us the answer to most of that. He said there, let me get back to my verse. He said there, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. There was something he was commanded that he did not do. So I wonder what that was. Whatever that is, we need to pay attention to. I'll just give you the notes for it and we'll cover it in a sermon tonight. The king's command. First command he was given is in chapter 9, verse 16. He's commanded to save my people out of the hand of the Philistines. Okay, that's what I thought he was doing. But a careful inspection of that passage will show how he's to do it. It's not a matter of us just accomplishing something. God's interested in how you did it. Your attitudes sometimes weigh heavier than your actions with God. In our verse, he says this, thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hands of the Philistines. For I've looked upon the people because their cry is coming to me. Now, notice there, he says, I'm going to anoint him captain, not king. Imagine that. We recognize him as king. God recognizes him as captain. Why? Because the king is over the captain. And Saul was supposed to be in submission to God. That's how he's supposed to go against the Philistines. Not as king. Saul thought he was king. God said, no, you're supposed to be a captain. So he was supposed to fight the Philistines. And he was supposed to defeat them as a captain, not as a king. As a Christian, we have one arch enemy. It's not the Philistines, it's sin. The only way we're to defeat it is not as king. You can't get rid of sin. Your blood doesn't cover it. The only way we can get rid of it is through following the commands of our leader, Jesus Christ. Because his blood does cover it. You can't ignore sin and live peaceably with it. You've got to fight it, but you can't fight it in your own strength. You got to fight it at his direction. Okay, he was supposed to do that. He was supposed to fight the Philistines. He's also supposed to feed Israel. That was one of the commands. In 2 Samuel 5:2, it says, thou shalt feed my people Israel. Also supposed to lead Israel. Thou shalt be captain over Israel. That's leader, a captain, not a dictator like a king. Those are the message notes that we'll cover tonight, and we'll find all the cross references and see how that applies to us. There's the fun story, and I wanted to plot it on the map so you can see how it all moved, and then we'll pick up some details tonight.